have a minhag all year round of putting salt on the table, especially Friday night, dipping the challah in the salt. So there's a discussion among the poskim, the minhagim, what about putting salt on the matzah Leil Pesach? Does the minhag of putting salt on the bread on the matzah apply to Leil Pesach? So the Machaber, Rav Yosef Karo seems to say yes. He says you should dip the challah, dip the matzah in the salt. However, the Ramah writes, "Minhag eino kain," we don't put salt on the matzah Leil Pesach. So the minhag Ashkenaz, Pashtus the Sfardim do because that's what the psak of the Machaber, Rav Yosef Karo. But Ramah seems to say no salt Leil Pesach. And the question is, why not? Why don't we have salt Leil Pesach? So first of all, why do we have salt all year round? So why do we have salt? We have salt all year round, but they compare the shulchan to on the mizbeach, and therefore, just like on the mizbeach, every carbon had to have salt. So too, the mizbeach equal our shulchan, and our achil equals the carbon. So therefore, that's why we're not supposed to kill bugs on the table, because you can't kill bugs on the mizbeach as well. So what about bisman hazeh, that we have pas nakia, we have good tasting bread? What is the reason for the salt? Is the salt to taste good, or is it for other reasons? So Tosfos seems to say it's all about the taste. So therefore, bisman hazeh, we have pas nakia, good tasting bread, there's no need to have salt. And Tosfos goes, Rabbeinu Meshulam or Rabbeinu Menachem, one of the two, who disagrees and says that there is no need for salt. There still is a need for salt today, because even though it's true we have pas nakia, but we want to be safe from all the angels being makatrik, making a case against us. In other words, there's a time period when in between the washing and the hamotzi where people can't talk. They can't even talk Dvar B'Teilim, that's good, but they can't do Torah and mitzvahs, they can't do anything. So in order to that there shouldn't be makatrik on us, we're wasting our time, so we put the salt on the table. The salt should be minagi, and the salt should protect us and remind us that just like the salt was on a carbon, that was a kapara for us, so too the salt on the table. And my nafkamina is let's say you don't have salt, so you use something else, you use sugar. So according to the Bali Tosfos, perhaps you should use sugar, because maybe sugar makes the bread even taste better. You put the good stuff on top. And according to Rabbeinu Meshulam, no, the tztafka is salt. If you don't have salt, there's no need for sugar, because the whole issue is tztafka salt, because salt was put on the mizbeach, on the carbon. And in fact, that's the issue later post can talk about. If you don't have salt to soak out the blood, could you use sugar? That's a separate discussion. And we know you can't put sugar on the mizbeach. That gets into the whole discussion of wine, even if it's yayin she'eino mavashol. But if it's sugar in it, it's also a problem al gabi hamizbeach, and perhaps according to the Rambam, it's even a problem for kiddush. But that's a separate discussion. So if we don't have if you don't have any, should you use sugar or not? And then so therefore we assume we paskin like the Magen Avraham says we passing like Rabbeinu Menachem, but we put salt on even though we have pas nakia. So the Ramah brings down, but however, Leil Pesach we do not put salt on the table. Why not? So the Mishnah Berurah writes, because tonight the matzah represents lechem oni, poor man's bread, and therefore we don't want to make it more fancy. We're putting salt on. So Tosfos points out, or I should say, they ask on the Mishnah Berurah, is that what do you mean we put salt on? We don't want to put salt on because it's lechem oni. We see from Mishnah Pirkei Avos that we see that if someone, we see from the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that what's a person to live like a poor person, pas b'melach tochel. You should eat the pas b'melach. You eat the bread together with the salt. Or as the Gemara says in Brachas Dabeis Amud Beis, that when is the time to say Kriya Shema? When the time Ani eats pita b'melach. So we see this associated with poor man's, but of course the price of matzah shmura is in lechem oni at $25 a box, but it means the ingredients are lechem oni, the water and the flour. That's what Mishnah Berurah writes. Aruch HaShulchan doesn't like it, and therefore he gives another answer, because we see salt is associated with the poor person. So the reason is because Aruch HaShulchan says we have to show our chavivas. We have to show we can't wait to eat the matzah, so we don't want to put anything on and want to leave it plain and whole. Others say maybe leil shimurim, and therefore we don't need the salt to protect us. So either way, the meaning is, according to the Rama, not to put salt on your matzah leil Pesach, because even though ordinarily we do, but we don't need it tonight. There's another night of the year as well. We don't put on matzah, we don't put salt on, and that is Leil Rosh Hashanah, and perhaps throughout the Yom HaNorah until Shmini Atzeres, we put on honey. And B'davka, the style with the Chazon Ish, right, not only do we put on honey, but B'davka don't put on salt. The question is why? Why discriminate against salt? That's it. If you want honey, put honey with salt. It's something dafka, you don't want honey on the table, you don't want salt on the table, Leil Rosh Hashanah. So Rav Shimshon Bar Hirsch discusses it in the context of why when it comes to the karbanos we have salt but no honey, and Rav Yonah talks about the power of honey in general. So the Mepharshim point out that salt is a natural preservative. It retains what it is. If you want to keep something the same way, you put salt on it. If something's spoiled and you put salt on it, it's not going to change it. Honey has the ability, works by changing things. It has the ability to overpower something. You put honey in, that's what Tosfos asks, how can we eat honey? It doesn't have the legs of bees in it, or maybe put non-kosher stuff in. It doesn't make a difference because honey transformed it into something else. So the koach of salt is to preserve, and the koach of honey is to change. That's why some people are insulted if you want to put salt in the soup, so they're okay with soup. If you tell them you want to put spicy mayo, ketchup, mustard on something, they get offended because you're changing the taste. By salt, you're just preserving the chicken soup, or whatever soup you're talking about. So they point out, so on Leil Rosh Hashanah, what do we want to do? We want to change. We want to show God in Yachia, the Rambam, Hilchos Tshuva, we want to show we become someone else. And therefore, that's why we put honey on. And that's why the Gemara says, in Masha'in Kain, by salt on the Mizbeach, we want to show that we're retaining the Masorah, we're retaining the same way that we always did. And that's what they point out. That's what the Chafetz Chaim points out. Torah is even sweeter than honey. That Torah is either honey has the ability to transform, and Torah has the ability to transform even more. As Rabbi Yosha points out, that honey can only transform different pieces of treif, but not a beria. But Torah has the ability to change a person completely, and that's the pshat. The Medrash is called Talmid Chacham She'ein Bo Deya. Any Torah scholar doesn't have common sense. Nevela tova imanu. Nevela, a piece of carcass is even better. What's the connection? So we understand nevela you throw into a piece of honey, it could change. But this person has no seichel, is not changing. It's even worse than a nevela. So that's the pshat. That honey represents change, and salt represents tradition. In fact, that's what Rav Soloveitchik pointed out, the difference between, let's say, the role of a Kohen Gadol and the role of an ani. The Kohen Gadol has to wear the big day kahuna. The clothes make the man. And Bisman shebigdeyam aleim kedushasam aleim. As long as if you're not wearing the big day kahuna, you can't do the avodah. The clothes play an integral role of being the Kohen Gadol. Masha'en Kain, a Navi, we don't find any uniform. In fact, there's nothing uniform about a Navi. A Navi, every generation, every Nevuah has a different Nevuah for that specific generation. So therefore, Rav Soloveitchik explains that a Kohen Gadol, so he doesn't change. Therefore, the big day kahuna, he has specific uniforms. But a Navi is changing with the times. He's constantly changing. Therefore, there is no uniform. And that's the pshat, the difference between salt and honey. And that's the pshat we could say over here as well. There is no salt. This is the machlokas machaba ramah, whether there's salt the night of Pesach. So we could point out that the night of Pesach really has a dual role. On one hand, we say it's called the avoda. We wear a kitto. We do many things. We wash our hands. For wet vegetable things, we used to do b'zman Beis Hamikdash Kayim. So one hand it's an avoda, it's a seder. So part of the seder is we have the do's and don'ts. We have certain specific parts of the seder. We have to do the same way your father did it, your grandfather, your great-grandfather. There's a level of Masorah. On the other hand, no salt to show that don't just do it the same exact way. You're living in a different generation. It's all about chinuch habanim, education. And if you teach the same message to your kids that they were taught 200 years ago, you're not going to be dealing with today's challenges and today's issues. So on one hand, it's part of the Seder, we have to keep the avoda. On the other hand, it's no salt to show that you have to learn to change with the times and give the answers to the different kids, like they have the Arba Banim. So Rav Nissen Alpert explains it's not just one child, but we all go through different stages in life. Hopefully we spend most of the time on a Chacham, then a Rasha, a Tam Sheno, the Elisho. And therefore the challenge is to know when to take the honey and when to take the salt. And that's what we see, that certain times we have to know when. That's in the Navi and a Kohen Gadol, Rosh Hashanah, and other days of the year. But sometimes you have to know that honey is not always sweeter than salt, and sometimes salt could be even sweeter than honey.